Owen Parker always considered himself a pretty stable guy. Sure, life threw the occasional curveball, but he handled it. Lost his job, picked up freelancing, dog ran away, adopted a stray cat named Puddles. Life, though imperfect, had balance. That was until the morning he walked into his living room and found his wife, Sandra, and his younger brother, Kevin, exchanging a secret handshake that was a little too intimate for siblings-in-law. John, Sandra gasped, springing off the couch like a guilty teenager caught sneaking out. Kevin, the baby-faced 26-year-old John had always bailed out of trouble, stared at him like a deer caught in headlights. The silence in the room was deafening. It hit John like a train. His wife, his brother, his couch, his couch. "You've got to be kidding me," John muttered, backing out of the room. "In my own house? Kevin, you can't even afford rent, but you can afford to." "John, wait," Sandra pleaded, but he was already halfway out the door, car keys jingling like the soundtrack to his breakdown. Level 1, Denial, 5 minutes, 23 seconds. John drove aimlessly for the better part of the morning, blasting a playlist of his usual feel-good tracks. Surely this wasn't real. Sandra wasn't like that. And Kevin was too dim-witted to even spell affair. Maybe he'd hallucinated it. Maybe it was all a bad dream fueled by the questionable gas station sushi he'd eaten last night. But then his phone buzzed, a text from Sandra. "We need to talk." Level 2, Anger, 2 hours, 15 seconds. Talk? John gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. Oh, they'd talk, all right. He pulled into the nearest parking lot, a Hobby Lobby, and started typing furiously. "Talk? How about you talk to Kevin about keeping his pants on?" But before he hit send, his brain short-circuited with rage. No, texting wasn't enough. He needed to scream into the void, to punch a pillow, to throw something that wouldn't leave a dent he'd later have to pay for. Instead, he opened Twitter. "Shout out to my brother and wife for starring in today's episode of Betrayal, the home edition." The likes poured in. Level 3, Bargaining, 37 minutes, 9 seconds. After the adrenaline wore off, the tweets didn't feel as cathartic as he'd hoped. What if he could salvage this? He loved Sandra. She was his partner in everything. Maybe this was a mistake, a one-time lapse in judgment. Maybe therapy could help. He googled how to forgive your cheating spouse and sibling and found a subreddit dedicated to stories far worse than his. One post, titled "My Husband Slept with My Mom," made John feel like he'd landed on the easy mode of familial betrayal. Maybe it wasn't that bad, maybe. Then a notification popped up. Kevin had liked his tweet. Level 4, Depression, 12 hours, 43 seconds. Back at his apartment, well, technically still their apartment, John sat in the dark, surrounded by empty takeout containers and half a bottle of Jack Daniels. Puddles sat on his lap, kneading his thigh like she knew he was in mourning. "You're all I've got left, Puddles," John said, his voice cracking. He opened Netflix and hovered over Breaking Bad. "We're watching something dark tonight." Hours melted into each other. Somewhere between episodes, Sandra texted again. He didn't read it. Kevin called. He ignored it. His couch loomed in the background like a ghost of comfort past. Level 5, Acceptance, 3 days, 6 hours, 22 seconds. On the third day, John rose, not from the dead, but from the couch. He showered, shaved, and googled how to file for divorce. Sandra had texted yet again, offering to explain. Kevin even left a voicemail that started with, "Bro, I didn't mean for this to happen." But John was done. He updated Twitter one last time. "Officially single, couch for sale, DM if interested." The replies were supportive, filled with memes and offers to help him move. One stranger even sent him a link to a speedrunning forum where gamers shared strategies for recovering from life's most absurd challenges. John wasn't broken anymore. He was a man on a mission, a man speedrunning his way out of despair and into something resembling freedom. And just like that, his personal best was set, 3 days, 6 hours, and 22 seconds to overcome betrayal. Art 2, Leveling Up. John's journey of speedrunning depression didn't just stop at acceptance, it evolved into what he started calling the redemption arc. After all, he couldn't just let betrayal define him. He needed to win this game of life by upgrading his stats, grinding experience points, and, most importantly, beating the final boss, his own insecurities. Quest 1, Divorce Any %. The first objective was filing for divorce, but John didn't want to do it like any regular schmuck. No, he approached it with the same level of focus a gamer reserves for glitch hopping through a tricky level. Armed with YouTube tutorials and subreddits, he discovered the fastest way to process a no-contest divorce in his state. He prepared all the documents online, filling them out in record time, then drove to the courthouse with the speed of someone avoiding respawn points. At the clerk's desk, he smiled, a strange sense of accomplishment washing over him. "Congratulations," the clerk said dryly, stamping his papers. "You've unlocked single-player mode. Achievement unlocked. Quest 2, The Couch Gambit." The next challenge was exorcising the ghost of betrayal, aka his couch. Every time John looked at it, he imagined Sandra and Kevin on it, and rage bubbled to the surface. Selling it was non-negotiable. He listed the couch online. "Slightly used couch for sale, barely sat on by me, heavily clapped on by my wife and brother. DM for details." The post went viral. Offers flooded in, not just for the couch but for TV interviews and podcast appearances. One buyer stood out, a woman named Becca who wanted to support his healing journey. She paid double the asking price and promised the couch would be part of an art installation titled Domestic Betrayal. John shook her hand, feeling like he'd just passed off the cursed object in a horror movie. Quest 3, Speedrunning Glow Up. Now that his physical space was clear, John turned his attention to himself. He looked in the mirror, frowning at the dark circles under his eyes, the 5-day scruff, and the hoodie that smelled vaguely of regret. If Sandra had moved on to Kevin, he was going to move on to himself. He bought a gym membership, though the thought of working out felt as intimidating as a Dark Souls boss fight. His first day on the treadmill was a disaster. He nearly flew off the thing while trying to text, but by the end of the week, he felt stronger, lighter, and oddly proud of the sweat stains on his shirt. His next upgrade was therapy. If life was a game, then therapists were like NPC guides, offering side quests for emotional growth. His therapist, a woman named Drive Patel, gave him weekly missions like journaling his thoughts and practicing mindfulness. "You're doing great," she told him during one session. John grinned. "Thanks, Doc, just trying to beat my personal best." Final boss, family reunion. The inevitable showdown with Kevin came during Thanksgiving. John hadn't planned on going home, but his parents begged him to show up, for the family, they'd said, conveniently ignoring that Kevin had nuked the very concept of family. When John arrived, the room tensed like a cutscene before a major boss fight. Kevin was there, staring at his plate of mashed potatoes like they held the meaning of life. Sandra was conspicuously absent, having wisely chosen to skip the event. John sat down across from Kevin, the table between them like a battle arena. "Hey, bro," Kevin started, voice trembling. "Look, I'm sorry." John raised a hand. "Stop, I don't want an apology." Kevin blinked, confused. "You don't?" "No," John said, leaning forward. "I want you to stop being an idiot." The table fell silent. Even their mom stopped refilling the gravy boat. "You can't just sleep with someone's wife and then act like it was an accident," John continued. "You've got to own your mistakes, and until you figure that out, you're not my brother, you're just Kevin." Kevin's face crumpled. He muttered something about therapy and left the room, leaving John with a weird mix of triumph and sadness. He'd beaten the boss, but there was no satisfaction in it. Post-credits scene. Months later, John stood on the balcony of his new apartment, watching puddles bat at a stray leaf. His life wasn't perfect, but it was his again. He'd leveled up, unlocked new quests, and even started dating, though he took it slow. On his phone, he scrolled through messages from his online followers. They'd started calling him Speedrun John, and someone had even made a fan video of his journey to self-recovery. He smiled, sipping his coffee. Life was no longer a speedrun, it was an open-world game, full of side quests, hidden treasures, and unexpected adventures. And John was ready to play. Part 3, Open-World Adventures. With the betrayal saga firmly in the rearview mirror, John fully embraced his new open-world life. The lessons from his speedrun recovery had armed him with resilience, humor, and the willingness to say yes to new quests, both mundane and extraordinary. Side quest, enter the podcast dimension. One day, while scrolling through his DMs, John noticed a message from a podcast producer. "Hey Speedrun John, your story blew up. Want to come on the pod? We're talking about modern betrayal stories and how people bounce back." At first, he hesitated. Did he really want to rehash everything in front of strangers? But then he thought about the countless people who had messaged him, saying his story gave them hope. If his tale could help others, why not? The podcast recording was oddly cathartic. John cracked jokes about the cursed couch, shared his tips for processing betrayal in record time, and even gave Puddles a shout-out. The host laughed so hard they nearly cried when John said, "The only thing faster than my divorce was Kevin running out of that Thanksgiving dinner." The episode went viral, and suddenly, John wasn't just a guy who survived a bad breakup, he was a symbol of resilience. People started calling him Speedrun Sage, asking for advice on everything from heartbreak to career burnout. Main quest, Love 2.0. John didn't plan to start dating again, but life had other plans. It began at the dog park, of all places. Puddles had decided that leashes were not just for dogs, so John had taken her for her daily walk in the park when a golden retriever bounded over to sniff her. "Is that a cat on a leash?" a voice asked, amused. John looked up to see a woman about his age, holding the golden retriever's leash. She had kind eyes, a mischievous smile, and a t-shirt that read "I break for side quests." "Yeah," John replied, scratching the back of his neck, "she likes to remind me who's in charge." The woman laughed. "I'm Becca, and this is Max. We're big fans of unconventional adventures." It wasn't until halfway through their coffee date that John realized Becca was the Becca, the artist who'd bought his cursed couch. She showed him a photo of her art installation, the couch covered in broken glass and surrounded by neon signs that read "Sit at your own risk." "People love it," she said, "though some claim it feels haunted." John laughed harder than he had in months. Side quest, New Game Plus. As his relationship with Becca blossomed, John started to embrace new challenges. Becca encouraged him to explore creative outlets, and he took up writing short, humorous essays about his life. One day, a publisher reached out. "We think your story has legs. Have you considered writing a book?" The idea of putting everything into words felt daunting, but John saw it as the ultimate side quest. He spent months turning his experiences into a memoir, Speedrun Sage, How to Fail Fast, Level Up, and Laugh About It. Final chapter, True Peace. A year later, John stood on stage at a small bookstore, reading excerpts from his book to a packed room. Becca sat in the front row, Max snoozing at her feet, while Puddles had somehow wormed her way onto John's lap. "Life isn't about avoiding failure or heartbreak," John read aloud. "It's about how fast you can pick yourself up, laugh at the absurdity, and find something worth chasing again." The crowd erupted in applause, but John's focus was on Becca. She gave him a thumbs up, her smile wide and encouraging. For the first time in years, John felt like he wasn't just surviving, he was winning. And this time, he wasn't in a rush. The expansion pack. John had expected his memoir, Speedrun Sage, How to Fail Fast, Level Up, and Laugh About It, to resonate with a small niche audience. He hadn't anticipated it becoming a bestseller, yet there it was, displayed prominently in bookstores and blowing up on social media. With success came new challenges. His quiet life was now a whirlwind of interviews, book signings, and invitations to motivational speaking events. It felt surreal, but John realized that the lessons he'd learned through his personal chaos could genuinely help others. Main quest, from memoir to movement. One day, during a live Q&A event, an audience member asked, "How do you stay so positive after everything you went through?" John smiled, leaning into the microphone. "I don't always. Some days I wake up feeling like the final boss is winning, but I remind myself that even in the hardest levels, there's always a way forward. Sometimes you just have to take a break, rethink your strategy, and try again." The audience erupted into applause, and John realized something. This wasn't just about him anymore. His story had become a beacon for others navigating their own betrayals, losses, and setbacks. With Becca's encouragement, he launched an online community called Level Up Guild, a space where people could share their stories of resilience, seek advice, and celebrate victories, big or small. Side quest, Kevin's redemption arc. Just when John thought he'd moved past his brother's betrayal, Kevin reappeared, this time, with a heartfelt apology. "John, I've been in therapy for a year now," Kevin said over coffee. "I realized how much I hurt you, and I just want to make amends. I don't expect us to go back to how things were, but I miss my brother." It wasn't easy, but John had grown enough to listen. Forgiveness, he realized, wasn't about letting Kevin off the hook, it was about freeing himself from the weight of resentment. Thanks, Kev, John said finally. I can't promise we'll be close again, but let's start with this coffee. Epic raid, marriage 2.0. 2 years after meeting Becca, John found himself in a tuxedo, standing at an altar. Puddles, now an honorary family member, wore a tiny bow tie as she strutted down the aisle as the cat of honor. Becca walked toward him, her smile brighter than any power-up he'd ever earned. As they exchanged vows, John couldn't help but think about how far he'd come, from a broken man speedrunning heartbreak to someone who had built a life worth celebrating. Post-credits scene, legacy mode. Years later, John sat at his desk, helping a teenager in his online community craft an essay for college. The teen, whose parents had gone through a messy divorce, thanked him for creating Level Up Guild. You really helped me, man, the teen wrote. It's like I found a cheat code for dealing with life. John smiled, typing back, you don't need cheat codes when you've got persistence, just keep leveling up. In the background, Becca was reading on the couch with Max snoozing by her feet, while Puddles poured at John's pen. Life wasn't perfect, but it was beautifully his. The final lesson? Life isn't a race, it's an open-world adventure, and the journey is the best part. Game Plus mode. John's life had evolved into something he hadn't imagined possible, a perfect blend of stability and excitement. But life, like any great game, always has hidden levels, side quests, and challenges to keep things interesting. Main quest, Parenthood Patch. A few years into his marriage with Becca, they decided to expand their party. The news came during a lazy Sunday morning, as they sat on the couch sipping coffee. Becca handed him a small box. Inside was a tiny onesie that read "New player joining the game." John stared at it, speechless, before breaking into laughter. I hope this one doesn't glitch out like me. Parenthood wasn't something John had ever pictured, but now that it was happening, he was all in. They spent the next 9 months preparing like it was a co-op campaign, reading guides, upgrading their home, and debating baby names. When their daughter arrived, John held her in his arms, overwhelmed by a feeling he couldn't quite describe. She was tiny, pink, and crying her lungs out, but to him, she was the ultimate win. Welcome to the game, kid, he whispered. Side quest, Level Up Guild goes IRL. The Level Up Guild had grown beyond John's wildest dreams, with thousands of members sharing stories, advice, and support. But one day, a group of members proposed a bold idea, an annual in-person convention. They called it LevelCon. John loved the concept. The first event took place in a rented community center, where attendees shared workshops on mental health, resilience, and even hobbies like speedrunning video games. John delivered the keynote speech, sharing his journey and encouraging others to keep pushing through life's toughest levels. Every time you think the game is over, he said, remember, there's always a new game plus waiting to be unlocked. The audience gave him a standing ovation, and as he stepped off the stage, Becca handed him their daughter, who babbled happily in his arms. Epic raid, revisiting the past. A year later, John received an unexpected email. Sandra, his ex-wife, wanted to meet. Closure, Becca suggested when John showed her the email. He agreed, though the idea made him nervous. When they met at a quiet cafe, Sandra looked different, softer, more grounded. I've wanted to apologize for years, she began. What I did was unforgivable, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I needed to say it. John thought about her words, feeling a strange mix of emotions. He didn't excuse what she'd done, but he also wasn't the man she'd betrayed anymore. Thank you, he said finally. I've moved on, and I hope you've found peace too. As they parted ways, John felt lighter. Post-credits scene, generational co-op. Years later, John stood in the backyard of his home, watching his daughter, now 7, chase after Puddles, who had somehow reached senior cat status but still acted like a kitten. Dad, she called out. Puddles is cheating. She's too fast. John laughed. Guess you've got to level up your speed stat. Becca joined him on the porch, holding 2 mugs of tea. You know, she said, leaning against him, if someone told me this was where we'd end up, I'd have laughed. Me too, John said, smiling. But that's the best part about life. You never know what's next. The camera zoomed out, If life had cameras, revealing their home surrounded by blooming trees, a cozy atmosphere of warmth and love. Game Plus mode wasn't just about replaying life, it was about doing it better every time. John looked at his family, his community, and the life he'd built, and for the first time, he felt he wasn't just surviving. He was thriving.